I'm 89 years old and I live alone. When people hear that, they don't usually ask me how I'm doing. They look at me like I'm either brave or foolish, like there are only two options. She must be fearless, or she must not understand the danger. But the truth is, I do understand the danger. I understand it better than most people because I've been old long enough to know what can go wrong in a quiet house. And I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. The fear that kept me awake at night was never dying alone. That's not what haunted me. The fear was losing my life while I was still alive, losing my choices, losing my voice, losing the small, ordinary freedoms that make a day feel like it belongs to you. Because there's a difference between being alone and being erased. And if you're afraid to live alone, you need to understand that difference before you let someone rush you into a place you can't easily leave. I've been a wife, a mother, a widow. I've buried people I thought I couldn't live without. And somehow, I kept waking up anyway. For the last few years, I've lived in a house that is too big for me now, yes. Too quiet some days, yes. But still mine in every way that matters. Every chair sits where it sits because I put it there. Every cup in my cabinet has a memory. Even the creaks in the floorboards feel familiar, like the house is talking back in a language I understand. And that matters more than people realize until they've been forced to give it up. My children worry. Of course they do. That's what children do when their parents become old. They start watching you the way you once watched them when they were small, looking for clues, scanning for trouble, listening for weakness in your voice, counting how many times you say, "I'm fine." Their love becomes careful, protective, sometimes even a little suffocating, though they never mean it that way. One day my daughter called and said, "Mom, we need to talk." And before she even finished the sentence, I knew where the conversation was going. When your children say, "We need to talk," it rarely means they're asking what you want. It usually means they've been discussing your life without you. She came over that weekend, and she didn't come alone. She brought her husband. That's how I knew this wasn't a gentle check-in. This was a plan. They sat at my kitchen table with coffee, and she started talking about options. Now, I've lived long enough to know that when someone says options in that tone, it doesn't really mean you have choices. It means decisions have been rehearsed, and now they're going to present them to you carefully, wrapped in concern, so you say yes without making them feel guilty. She offered 3 paths. I could move in with them, I could stay in my house, but hire a caregiver to come in regularly. Or we could start looking at what she called a community, a place where I would be safe, where staff would handle things, where I wouldn't be alone. She was kind. I could see the fear behind her kindness. Not fear of me, fear for me. And that made it harder to push back, because when someone is afraid for you, you don't want to dismiss it. You don't want to make their love feel foolish. So I told her I would think about it. And I did think about it, longer than she expected, because at my age, you don't rush a decision that changes your entire life. You've already learned what it costs to get the big decisions wrong. Eventually, I agreed to try the first option, living with her for a while, just to see. And I want to be fair when I talk about it. It wasn't awful. Her home is warm. Her children are lively, full of noise and energy. There were moments that were genuinely beautiful. Moments where my great-grandchild climbed into my lap like it was the most normal thing in the world, trusting me completely. I didn't realize how much I missed that kind of closeness until it happened again. But even in a good house, with good people, something began to change. Not immediately, quietly. Dinner happened at a time that wasn't mine. Morning routines started before my body felt ready. The TV was always on or always off, depending on what the household needed. I found myself waiting to speak because the kitchen was busy. I found myself adjusting my existence to fit around other people's schedules. No one told me to do it. No one asked me to shrink. But it happened anyway. Because when you move into someone else's life at my age, you don't become part of it the way you imagine. You become a careful addition, a respected guest. And being a guest sounds pleasant until you live it. A guest doesn't fully relax. A guest doesn't fully decide. A guest doesn't fully belong. I remember one morning standing in the hallway, half awake, listening to voices in the kitchen. Not a cruel conversation, not an argument, just the sound of planning, schedules, timing, who was picking up who and when. Something about the bathroom, something about making sure I didn't get confused on the stairs. I stood there with my hand on the wall and thought, I have become something that needs to be managed, worked around, protected. Not because I was bad, because I was old. And the feeling that came over me wasn't anger. It was clarity. A quiet kind of clarity that settles into your chest when you finally admit what you already knew. I stayed long enough to confirm it wasn't where I belonged. So I told my daughter I wanted to try the second option, help in my own home. A caregiver arrived. She was capable, efficient, professional. She cleaned, she organized. She moved through my house like she'd been trained to fix it. And on paper, it was exactly what people say an older person needs. But living with it felt different. Here's what people don't talk about. It's not just help that enters your home, it's presence. Another person's rhythm in your space. Another person touching things that used to only belong to you. My kitchen especially felt different. That room wasn't just a room. It was where my children grew up, where I stood at the sink after funerals, where I made soup when someone was sick, where I had quiet moments that never became stories, but was still the real fabric of my life. And now someone else was rearranging my drawers, stacking my plates differently, putting my spices in places I wouldn't reach for them. She meant well, I'm sure she did, but even kind help can make you feel like you've been moved out of your own identity. Then the numbers arrived. Care like that isn't small. It isn't temporary. It becomes a permanent expense. I sat down with a pen and paper, the way I used to when money mattered more, when every dollar had a job. And I realized the obvious truth. I could afford it for a while, but not forever. Not without leaning heavily on my daughter. Not without draining what I'd built. Not without becoming exactly what I feared becoming, a burden. That word carries weight when you spent decades standing on your own feet. So I let the caregiver go. And that left the third option, the community. The place with safety policies and schedules and staff who smile. I agreed to visit one because I wanted to be fair. I didn't want to reject it out of stubbornness. I wanted to know. It was clean, bright, organized. The people working there were kind. They showed me a small room with a window facing a courtyard. They showed me a schedule, morning stretches, lunch, activities, dinner, quiet hours, everything planned, everything accounted for. And as I stood there smiling politely, something inside me became very clear. I had spent nearly 9 decades making my own decisions. When to wake up, when to eat, what to do with my afternoons, how to spend my quiet moments. Those choices might look small to someone else, but they are not small to the person living them. They are the structure of your dignity. And in that place, without anyone saying it directly, I could feel those choices being replaced. Not stolen violently, not taken cruelly, just replaced efficiently for my own good. And somehow that made it harder to accept. On the drive home, I looked out the window and thought, not yet. Maybe one day, but not now. Because as long as I could still decide how to live my day, I wasn't ready to hand that over, even to kindness. So I went back home, and for a while it looked like I had rejected all solutions. It looked like I was being stubborn. It looked like I was choosing risk. But what happened next didn't come from a plan. It came from something small, so ordinary most people would miss it. It started by the mailbox. It was an afternoon like any other. I went out to get the mail, moving slowly because I don't rush anymore. And there, a few steps away, was a young woman I had seen around but never really met. She was struggling with a stroller, a bag of groceries, and a toddler who had made a firm decision that he was not taking another step. Now, I've lived long enough to recognize that look. The look of someone holding too many things with not enough hands. I knew it instantly, the way you recognize a language you once spoke fluently. So I said the simplest thing, "Can I hold something?" She blinked like she had forgotten other people existed for a moment. Then she said yes. I held the bag. She managed the stroller and the child, and within minutes the crisis passed. It was nothing grand, just a small moment of help. But sometimes that's where life changes, through small moments, not big speeches. Her name was Isla. She had moved in next door with 2 children. Life had rearranged itself for her in ways she hadn't planned. And I understood that more than she probably realized, because old age is also life rearranging itself, just in a different direction. We didn't make any official agreement. There wasn't a conversation where we decided to support each other. It just unfolded, naturally, quietly, like real community used to. A few days later, she knocked on my door. Her toddler had a fever, and she needed to take her older child to school. Could I watch him for an hour? Of course I could. That hour turned into 2. 2 turned into a morning here and there. And before long, there was a rhythm between us that didn't feel forced or structured. The toddler, Marcus, wasn't what you'd call easy. He had opinions about everything, loud opinions, but he was alive in a way that filled my rooms with movement again. He would stand in my kitchen staring at the cabinet glass, breathing on it to watch the fog appear and disappear like it was magic. I hadn't seen wonder up close in years. I didn't know how much I missed it until it returned. And then there was his sister Priya, who came by after school sometimes. She'd sit at my table while I made my late dinner and talk about her day like it mattered. She asked questions children ask before they learn to hide them. She asked why my hands shook. She asked if I remembered the old days. She once asked if people in the past saw the world in black and white because the photos were black and white. I laughed and told her we saw color, of course. And she looked at me like I had corrected something important about reality. One day she asked me if I was afraid of dying. I didn't know what answer she expected, so I told her the truth. Sometimes a little, I said, but mostly I'm just tired by 9 o'clock. She laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. That kind of laughter, unself-conscious, full-bodied, makes you feel like you're still part of the living world. Isla began helping me too, but not in the caregiver way that made me feel like a project. She helped the way neighbors help when they still believe neighbors are supposed to notice. If my groceries were heavy, she carried them. If I needed a ride to pick up something, she offered. If a light bulb went out in a place I couldn't safely reach, she handled it without turning it into a scene. She didn't announce that she was helping. She just did it. And I began helping her in ways that didn't cost me dignity. I watched the toddler. I walked with Priya when she wanted to talk. I listened when Isla was overwhelmed. I was present, steady, calm, not rushing, because old age gives you one thing younger people often lack: time without urgency. And something changed inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt useful again, not taken care of. Useful. And that is a difference most people don't understand until they lose it. My daughter visited one day, and she saw it in my face before I even said anything. She looked at me and said, "Mom, you seem like yourself again." And I realized she was right. Somewhere in the quiet exchange of help, something that felt like life returned. Not youth, not health, life, purpose, belonging. The feeling that my presence mattered to someone. Now, I'm not going to pretend this solved everything. There are still hard days. There are mornings when my body reminds me of my age in ways I can't ignore. There are moments when the house is quiet again. And yes, there are risks to living alone at 89. But here is the lesson I want you to understand if you're afraid to live alone. You don't have to choose between total independence and total surrender. You don't have to choose between I do everything myself and I live under someone else's schedule. There is a middle way, a humane way, a way that keeps you safe enough while keeping you yourself. And it usually doesn't begin with moving into a facility. It begins with building a small net, relationships, routines, and practical safety steps, so that living alone doesn't mean living abandoned. Here are the practical pieces that made the biggest difference for me. And you can do these even if you don't have a neighbor like Isla right now. I set up a simple check-in system. Not constant surveillance, just one person who notices if something is off. I keep a spare key accessible in a safe way so help can get in if needed. I made peace with that because it's not giving up control. It's choosing safety on my own terms. And I allow myself to ask for help early, before a small problem becomes a big one. That one habit alone prevents disasters. That's the part I want you to hear. Asking for help doesn't have to mean giving your life away. A nursing home isn't the only answer. Living with family isn't the only answer. Paid caregivers aren't the only answer. Sometimes the best answer is building a life that includes people without handing them the keys to your autonomy. If you're afraid to live alone, the fear is usually not actually about being alone. It's about losing control. It's about being treated like a problem to solve. It's about being alive, but no longer being the author of your own day. And if that's your fear, then I understand you completely, because that was my fear too. I am not telling you never to enter assisted living. There are situations where it becomes necessary. There are people who need medical care, memory care, mobility assistance beyond what a community net can provide. And choosing that isn't failure. But if you are still thinking clearly, still mobile enough, still capable of making decisions, and you're being pushed into a place you don't want, pause. Thank you for sitting with me in this quiet truth. Take care of yourself, and if you're afraid, don't let fear rush you into surrender. There's another way.